with the final two panels now. Hello and welcome again after these two exciting days, and great that we heard also could discuss a little bit the pros and cons of GitHub. So we go for bridging knowledge, connecting new media art archives. My name is Oliver Grau, founder and director of ADA and head of the Media Art History Society. Our panel will discuss the idea. There should be the first slide, but you'll remember this from the beginning on the slide of the Liverpool Declaration. Our panel will discuss the idea of connected archives, written down on the already mentioned Liverpool Declaration, calling for an interoperable and sustainable structure for archives. And we have here 4 representatives from major documentation archives to report on the current status of this goal, with 5 minutes per speaker. Before I hand over to the first one, let me add this thought: how broadly do we create the keyword bridges? Quick connections can be established evidently with artist names through wiki. There's also a gigantic work, but this will be a breakthrough. But in the medium term, we need to go also for scientific keyword bridges, trained, for example, on art historical thesauri and indices like the Getty AAT or the Warburg Index, as created with the bridging thesaurus. If you recall the slide from the beginning, enabling connections into art history. This is very important. And here is also a visualization of this hierarchical keyword bundles. Remember that. So we know that in the educational sector at art universities, museums, etc., there have been no such research instruments to date. As for example, astronomy has collectively developed on an international level with the so-called virtual observatory. And I'm very happy that Roger Molina, one of the key figures of that, who already recommended years ago that we should look at that, is here in our room. He can comment probably later on a little bit on that. So that with the so-called virtual observatory based on permanent intercontinental funding structures and data standards. Perhaps that is what we need to evaluate, creating a sustainable and broad connection for arts and humanities too. Anyhow, the diversity of archives, the different goals are one of the most fascinating and beautiful phenomena, as we just heard in the previous sessions. And this rich and growing cultures of archiving, which differentiate us also from astronomy, for example, should be supported. So the first speaker is Philipp Hoffmann, manager of the infrastructures for digital arts teaching and research project at the University for Continuing Education in Austria. Philipp, please.
Thank you very much, Oliver. I would like to introduce or reintroduce, I think we've met several times in the last days, weeks, but we are presenting a panel on our work in the Connecting New Media Archives initiative over the last couple of years. I will introduce a very rough outline of our work, and then we'll each present briefly on how that has impacted us, and then we'll open up for a discussion. Thank you very much. So we are a working group that pre-exists my involvement, but it's occupied a large part of my life for the last 2 years. It's covering the file, ISEA, SIGGRAPH, and ADA archives. Also, Ars Electronica is involved and will become more involved as they get some momentum on their new archiving project. What are we doing and why? And I want to report to you on what we're doing and how we're doing it, but I really want to pose the question, why are we doing this? As archivists, as historians, as artists, we understand there's an implicit value in preserving this, but we pretty much heard every single representative over the last 2 days talk about how there are no resources. And so I'll speak to that later. But in principle, over the last 2 years, we've been meeting on a monthly basis to share our analysis, to coordinate work, and to do technical exchange. The reason for this is essentially to enhance the integrity and the discoverability of the information we are custodians of. And it's a very, very long journey. We've done it through this analysis, coordination, and technical exchange. And I'll say something briefly about the technical exchange because it's led us to where we're going to go next. And that is, one of the exercises we've undertaken is to try and identify a common data model between the different structures of our archives. And it was a very informative exercise because what we understand is we do not have a common data model. We have all unique data models. And that got us thinking about how to take this more seriously. So with that in mind, I'd like to hand over to Paula and talk a little bit about the file.
Wow. Okay. Yes. Okay. I will, with this presentation, because Fabiana has already talked about the archive, and we also in the previous meeting have mentioned about the archive. I will here talk and make a brief history of how we got here. So also the young archives can join us somehow. This will give just a brief breakthrough of how File Archive got involved in this project of connecting archives. So to begin with, you change it for me? Yeah, thank you. To begin with, I will quickly provide a brief history of File Festival, which is 23 years old and has organized more than 53 exhibitions in Brazil. And the file has accumulated significant amount of physical and immaterial documentation. So how it gets involved here? Yeah. In 2020, should we move? Yeah. In 2020, during an online session at ISEA in Montreal, during the pandemic, File presented an ambitious plan to create an electronic art archive. And at that point, 2 years ago, it was only a project. We had nothing online. We had only our website. Yeah. After the ISEA 2020 summit, File initiated a conversation with Bonnie Mitchell and John Silliman, both here, two experts in the field, to further explore the possibility of bringing this project to fruition. In March 2001, so we can go on, File Festival hosted the File Alive online meeting as part of my PhD project research, which brought together museums, artists, and cultural institutions, as well as the community of artists, professionals, and researchers to discuss the challenges involved in managing, create, and preserving digital cultural heritage, which many of our colleagues are here, so I'll take the opportunity to thank them. Following this meeting, ISEA, SIGGRAPH, and File held numerous discussions to gain a deeper understanding of each archive, including the metadata and taxonomies, as well as how these archives were constructed. Yes, okay. In between, File chose the Tainacan digital repository, as Fabiana has showed earlier, as the platform to build its online archive, due to its flexibility, power, and the fact that it's a free WordPress plugin and theme. The File archive consists of 8 collections, each comprising various items. Tainacan allows you to configure a taxonomy, metadata, and filters that meet your collection's specific requirements. All activities are meticulously recorded and can be easily reviewed by digital collection managers. File Festival Online Archive currently contains input data of documentations of artworks, experience, and presentations features in the events held by the File Festival from 2014 to 2022, and containing until now more than 3,000 individual data inputted. To enhance the presentation and publication of the File collection, a bespoke Tainacan team was developed, which is highly functional, efficient, and responsive, adapting seamless to any screen size or format. Consequently, a collaboration with other Ars Electronica File, ISEA, and SIGGRAPH began to expand the value of information across isolated archives. By discovering collections across this archive, we can enhance the construction of cultural memory and more efficiently endorse the artistic production history of new media art. The primary goal now is to work on the interoperability between archives, looking forward to bridging knowledge in connecting archives. So thank you.
Well, this was to
Did
the
you
point.
advance?
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Terry Wong, archivist, and you've seen him a few times already during this conference. Co-organizer for the ISEA Archives is working on a research study on connecting new media art archives, archiving worldwide.
Hi, everyone. So I will begin with talking about ISEA Archives. The ISEA Archives is a we archived the ISEA Symposium, and the Symposium began in 1988. It is a nomadic international symposium and annually taking place in different city. And what we do is we archive all the contributors and their works. And sorry. Yeah. And ISEA Archives been organizing the summit on new media archive with the archive partners for the last few years. Before I talk about ISEA Archive, I would like to briefly explain how the Connecting Archive project related to the summit. Paula already talked about this. We began the project after the first summit, specifically after the breakout section on the first summit. And then this ongoing project intends to connect database between institutions worldwide and also enable information to share across different institutions for new media art. And then in second summit took place at ISEA 2022 Barcelona. We have also two sections, one roundtable and presentation session. And come to this year, we are having this bridging knowledge section and also previous sections that for the topic on connecting archives. So I'm going to quickly talk about ISEA Archives. We have two online repository right now, one classic and one new archive. We are in the process of migrating data from the classic to the new, while we are updating new content to both of them at the same time. And the classic archive is a text-based version, and the new archive improved the data structure and enabled metadata connection, and so overall improved the data management and searchability, makes it more ready to connect with other archives. And back in 2020, we made some experiments connecting archive with connecting the data from ISEA Archive to SIGGRAPH History Archive. And we extended that project, and then we also trying to connect with the data with other archives partner, including SIGGRAPH here, you can see. So this is one of the example we have on our archives, taking you from one archive to another archive, navigating the artist information. And we are looking for more robust solution in the future to expand this project with other partners.
And that brings us to the SIGGRAPH History Archive, which I will give you a very brief history of the world of the SIGGRAPH Archive. It started in 1995, believe it or not, I came up with the idea of creating websites for each of the art exhibitions because they were not documented even in the publications back then. And so I created a website for each of the years, evolving into Flash-based websites, right? We all know the history of that. And so, but the problem was there was no connection between any of these websites. They were designed very, very differently as far as the information architecture, as well as the visual design, very small resolution images. And at the same time, I was creating artist profiles and documenting artists' works. Many years later, I looked back and said, whoa, that was a mistake. I mean, it was a good starting point, but it was time to create some kind of unified interface that enabled researchers and artists and community members to access the information in an easy way. And so I started working on the SIGGRAPH archive. Actually, I don't even remember, was it the ISEA one first or the SIGGRAPH one? I mean, the new SIGGRAPH one, but I was involved in both organizations, and they started off as standard, like the interface should be the same, okay, for all the years. But then I realized that we really needed some way of creating relationships and connections between the data. So I'd work a little bit on the ISEA archive, and then I'd go back to the SIGGRAPH archive. I'd modify that one, make some major changes, bring that back to the ISEA archive. So that's how the new ISEA archive came around. And that is also how the new SIGGRAPH archive came about, is this interconnection of, you know, people sharing ideas and also the technology behind it. And that archive contains a lot of information, tons of information. We evolved from the SIGGRAPH Art Show archive to the entire SIGGRAPH organization's archive, which amplified the amount of data that we had to deal with by 50 times, 100 times. It was huge amounts of data. So we created a framework that enabled us to compartmentalize each bit of data. Now that caused a bit more work on getting the data into the archive, right? And so, and a lot of programming. We created this tool using this framework, using a lot of coding. And if Jan is on, she will talk a little bit more about that coding in just a minute. But the important thing for us is by creating the relationships between the data, then we could do amazing things, right? Because both Jan and I, well, Jan's a computer scientist and she'll be joining us in just a minute. I also studied computer science, but I am a digital artist. And so it enabled us to kind of bridge that knowledge between us. And I'll turn this over to Jan to talk a little bit about the coding and that enables us to do amazing things. Jan, go ahead.
Are you there?
Okay, hang on. Let me turn on the audio over here.
Jen, one more minute, 30 seconds for you.
Jan, are you there?
So here I am. Hello, everyone. PODS provided us with a very simple programming interface known as templates that allow us to query those data fields and then display them on a page. So for a person's profile page, we can go down and see if the person has a picture, this is what we want it to look like. If a person has a bio, and so on. On the next slide, we can see that we also, to connect to other archives, we added data fields for the working group of ISEA File, Ada, and Ars Electronica, and we added some programming at the profile page that allowed you to, if there is a connection in the SIGGRAPH archive for Matt Kenyon, if he does appear in the ISEA archive, then we simply have the URLs stored there. Now, these URLs were put in by hand. We haven't automated this yet, but we can show that we are able to query that. And since ISEA and SIGGRAPH both have the same back end of pods, we can go from ISEA to SIGGRAPH, SIGGRAPH to ISEA. For the other archives, we can go to the file page, but then there's no way to get back at this point. Another thing that we have in this is the ability to export data. Now, this is not fully functional yet. There are some memory problems, but we can, for example, export all 21,000 people that are in the archive with their unique ID, their name, the URL of their profile page. And I might note, by the way, this code is in GitHub.
Thank you very much for all of you for these very short updates. What has happened during the last set?
It is next.
Oh, okay, good.
You want to hear about it?
Okay, good.
So the project that I've been doing is on the Archive of Digital Art, the ADA database, and this was established by my professor Oliver Grau many years ago. In fact, it was begun as the database of virtual art. Introduced here, my microphone. Introduced last century, in fact, pioneering archive of digital and virtual art, and importantly, conceptualized as a collaborative and social space with expanded documentation. The point of this, I think, is not lost on us, that it is about the power of connecting. Now, one of the things we've encountered as technical challenges in our collaborations is our archives have different structures because they have different heritage and they have different purposes. Some are static historical repositories, others, like ours, are conceptualized as an active community. And this creates different needs, different structures, different patterns of change. But we all understand that it's a very powerful thing to connect. And so we are attempting to replicate that same person-based approach so that any archive that documents the work of, let's say, a specific artist can adopt a methodology for identifying records to do with that artist or collective and later objects in other archives. That is the goal. Because ultimately what we want to do is explore a space across many archives. Perhaps it's going to be a long time before we build our own horizon, but we can start that work. So in conclusion, people have mentioned a lot of technical challenges. The solution to that is not more detail. The solution to that is abstraction. We need to work on being able to describe our archives in a very abstract way so that they can relate to each other objectively. We need to iterate that work because we can't do it all at once. We need to find partners, not only with whom to exchange data, but to exchange knowledge, reassurance, lessons, and steady hands over time, because it is a journey. And finally, in the pursuit of funding and the sustainability of what we do, we need to get better at articulating the benefits. We all, as I began this talk, understand the inherent value in the objects that we curate and take care of, but we need to express a compelling value to a broader audience, not just our peers. And on that note, I'd like to hand over to Bonnie again. A bit of a rant.
Well, I hope that we have time to have a conversation with all of you, because a lot of interesting things have been said this week, and I've reflected on a few of them. And a couple of things that resonate with me is somebody mentioned chasing fragments. This idea of it's disappearing faster than we can get to it. And we feel this every day in all of these archives. And we feel like, you know, it's almost an impossible task, but we're going to try anyway, right? Another thing that came out is this concept of who owns the truth. And so I want to ask you, who owns an archive? Earlier, somebody had mentioned something about, you know, the organizational board or committee or the director owns the archive and should be the person or group that's making these decisions. I would argue that an archive, it's the community that owns the archive. It is not one person, it's not the creator. It's like being a parent and you have just given birth to 48,000 people, who knows how many, you know, but you have the responsibility as a parent to oversee that, but you don't own the lives of those children.
Well,
And-
Connie, you extend a little bit your speaking time, since I want to give also.
Oh,
the-
no,
the
this is
audience- we
the
have
conversation.
5 more minutes. Okay, so we have 5 more minutes also. If you
Yeah.
guys, you can also intervene to come up with suggestions, questions. And of course, you also can continue the discussion. Anybody there who has a comment?
We have a spare microphone.
Yeah, I was hoping it would be a dialogue and I just wanted to throw out some ideas. It's,
My question would be if you have a more or less clear idea about what would be the minimum requirement for another archive, existing or not,
Mm.
can connect to the initiative and be interoperable with the connected archives.
The minimum viable product is something online that is programmatically accessible. That can be difficult to establish, especially if you don't have the technical infrastructure or support. So again, choose with one dimension, i.e. a person or an object or an event. Focus on that. But again, think of it in abstract terms and find engineers within the community.
I was just thinking about that, actually. How can we make it very accessible to the people that don't have that support?
Mm.
And so one of the things that when Vandeplas did with the classic archive is he has a plain old text listing of all the archives. Can we create maybe a little bit more visual listing and then provide that code or that material to all the other archives to include in their online website? And of course, the more technically intense one would be this automated system. Violetta? Here, pass.
Okay.
Oh,
I was wondering if innovation with museums have a similar effort. I know in the museum studies there's a similar effort to connect different museums that acquire new media art. And if you know the project matters media art, you communicated with them at all?
we personally created a connection between the V&A, their Pioneers of Digital Art collection, a subset of that, with the SIGGRAPH archive, that we had a specific collection. So that was one small project.
Time for one more question.
The microphone is there.
Hi, so thank you very much. This is very, very helpful to just understand a little bit. I'm an artist, not an archivist. I don't come from an institution. It's a very different method. My question for you is, would there be a possibility for all of you to create a method so artists ourselves can start thinking of archiving our own things, because I believe that it's about habit that we have of not doing it. We have never been told that this was a possibility, and we get caught in production and distribution. So is there any envisioning of this in the future?
Maybe would you like to answer that one?
It's okay.
Terry's
talking about guidelines.
Guidelines. Oh, yes, I mean, this is one of the reasons why we want to build up a community, and we can share all those information with artists, you know, it's not about the most up-to-date technology. It's about communications and how we could distribute the information and knowledge to all the audience, like including not only the archivists, also the artists and all the stakeholder in new media archive. I mean new media arts. Yeah.
Thank you so far. We finish now this double panel or summit with the important topic of the strategic planning of its own future. So we have a little change here.